John Wayne is dying. Everyone in Hollywood knows it. The Duke, the toughest man who ever lived, reduced to 140 pounds. His family watches him waste away. Visitors come to his house with tears in their eyes, speaking in hushed, careful voices, like he's already a ghost. And it's killing him almost as much as the cancer. Then Dean Martin walks through the door. He takes one look at John Wayne. This man who's lost 80 pounds, who can barely stand, who looks like a skeleton, and says 5 words that nobody else would dare to say. 5 words that will make the Duke laugh for the first time in 2 months. 5 words that will become the greatest gift anyone gives John Wayne in his final days. Watch what happens, because what Dean does in the next 2 hours won't just change John Wayne's last months of life. It'll teach us something profound about what real friendship actually means when someone you love is dying. April 1979. John Wayne's house in Newport Beach, California. The cancer that took his lung 15 years ago has come back with a vengeance. This time it's in his stomach. They removed the entire organ in January. The surgery nearly killed him. The recovery is worse. Duke's family watches him disappear a little more each day. His famous 6'4" frame used to carry 230 pounds of pure American muscle. Now, 140 pounds, maybe less. His clothes hang off him like he's a child playing dress-up in his father's closet. His face is gaunt, sunken, the skin pulled tight over his skull. When he walks, it's slow, careful, like every step might be his last. But here's what's killing Duke more than the cancer. The way people look at him now, the pity, the sadness, the careful, gentle voices, like he's already dead, like they're talking to a ghost. Just a few weeks ago, Duke made what everyone knew would be his final public appearance, the Academy Awards. April 9th, 1979. He was there to present Best Picture. It was supposed to be triumphant, a legend, taking the stage one last time. Instead, it was heartbreaking. When John Wayne walked onto that stage, the entire audience gasped. Some people started crying immediately. Duke was so thin, so frail, so clearly dying that it was shocking to witness. He could barely walk. His voice, once booming and powerful enough to command a cavalry charge, was weak and raspy. But Duke stood there and did his job. He presented the award with as much dignity as he could muster. The audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted forever, not for the presentation, but because everyone in that room knew they were watching a dying man's final public moment. They were saying goodbye. Backstage afterward, Duke was surrounded. Celebrities, executives, crew members, everyone wanting to tell Duke how brave he was, how much they admired him, how he'd always be remembered. Duke smiled, nodded, thanked them all, but inside he was dying a different death, the death of being pitied, the death of being treated like he was already gone. People approached him with tears in their eyes. They hugged him gently like he might shatter. They said things like, "You're so brave, and you're an inspiration, and we're praying for you." Duke appreciated their kindness. He really did, but what he wanted, what he desperately needed, was for someone to treat him like he wasn't dying, to treat him like he was still Duke, still the tough, ornery bastard who took shit from nobody. A few weeks after the Oscars, the phone rings at Duke's house. It's Dean Martin. Dean had watched the Academy Awards. He'd seen what everyone else saw, a man in his final days, and Dean decided he needed to visit his friend. But Dean didn't call to ask how Duke was feeling, didn't call to offer prayers or sympathy. Dean called and said, "Duke, I'm coming by tomorrow. Make sure you're home and not dead or anything inconvenient like that." Duke laughed, actually laughed. His daughter Asiya, who answered the phone initially, heard her father laughing from the other room and couldn't believe it. Duke hadn't really laughed in weeks. The next day, Dean shows up. Duke's family is nervous. They've seen how visitors affect Duke, how exhausting it is for him to maintain his tough guy persona when he feels so weak. They don't want Dean's visit to drain what little energy Duke has left. Dean rings the doorbell. Asiya answers. She looks at Dean with sad eyes and starts to say, "Mr. Martin, thank you for coming. My father is he awake?" Dean interrupts. "Yes, but he's very weak." "Then let's not waste time. Where is he?" Dean walks past Asiya into the house. He finds Duke sitting in his living room, wrapped in a robe that used to fit him, but now looks 3 sizes too big. Duke looks up when Dean enters. For a moment, the two men just look at each other. Dean sees what everyone else has seen, his friend reduced to a shadow of himself. Duke sees something in Dean's eyes too, but it's not pity, it's recognition. Like Dean is looking past the disease and seeing the man underneath. Then Dean says it, the 5 words, "Jesus, Duke, you look like hell." Duke's family holds their breath. You can't say things like that. Duke is dying. You have to be gentle, supportive, careful. But Dean isn't finished. What happened? You stop eating beef? Duke stares at Dean for a long moment. Then his face breaks into a huge grin, and he starts laughing. Deep, genuine laughter. The kind that comes from relief. "Screw you, Dean," Duke says, still laughing. "I could still kick your ass even like this." "With what? Those toothpick legs? I've seen stronger sticks holding up tomato plants." Duke laughs harder. "Get over here, you bastard." Dean walks over and sits down next to Duke. Not too close. Not hovering like a nurse. Just sitting like they've done 100 times before on movie sets and at parties and in restaurants over the past 20 years. And for the next 2 hours, Dean Martin gives John Wayne the greatest gift anyone has given him in months: normalcy. Dean doesn't ask how Duke is feeling. He doesn't mention cancer. He doesn't talk about treatments or doctors or prognosis. He doesn't say anything that acknowledges Duke is dying. Instead, Dean tells stories. He talks about a terrible singer he saw in Vegas who couldn't hit a note if his life depended on it. He gossips about which Hollywood marriages are really in trouble. He complains about the new younger actors who don't know how to hold themselves on camera. Duke listens and occasionally interjects with his own stories and opinions. They argue about which Western directors are actually worth a damn. Dean says Howard Hawks is overrated. Duke calls Dean an idiot. They both laugh. Dean tells a dirty joke about a cowboy and a showgirl. Duke tries to tell one back but starts coughing halfway through. Dean waits patiently, then finishes the joke for him, deliberately getting the punchline wrong. Duke corrects him, and they argue about the proper way to tell a dirty joke. At no point does the conversation turn serious. At no point does Dean's face show sadness or pity. He treats Duke exactly as he always has, with irreverent humor, casual affection, complete acceptance. Duke's daughter Asa watches from the doorway at one point. She'll later say, "I saw my father laugh more in those 2 hours with Dean than he had in the previous 2 months. Dean wasn't careful with him, he wasn't gentle, he was just Dean, and that's exactly what my father needed." After about 2 hours, Dean stands up. "All right, Duke, I've got to get going. I've got a thing." Duke asks, smiling, "What kind of thing?" "The kind where I do things. None of your business." Duke laughs. "Get out of here, you bum." Dean starts walking toward the door, then he turns back. For just a moment, one brief moment, his cool facade cracks. His eyes meet Duke's, and there's something there. Recognition, love, grief, all the things Dean hasn't said out loud. "Duke," Dean says quietly. "Yeah?" Dean wants to say so many things. He wants to say, "I'm going to miss you. I'm sorry this is happening. Thank you for your friendship. You're one of the best men I've ever known." But Dean knows that saying those things would shatter the gift he just gave Duke. It would turn the visit into a goodbye. It would acknowledge what both men know but neither wants to admit. So instead, Dean says, "Try to eat something, would you? You're making the rest of us look fat." Duke grins. "Get out of here before I throw something at you." Dean leaves. He walks out of Duke's house, gets in his car and drives away. And he never sees John Wayne alive again. Duke dies on June 11th, 1979, just 2 months after Dean's visit. The cancer has finally won. Duke's final weeks are painful and difficult. He's in and out of consciousness. His family stays by his side. Hollywood mourns. At Duke's funeral, Dean Martin is one of the pallbearers. He stands alongside Frank Sinatra, James Stewart, and other Hollywood legends, carrying the casket of one of the greatest actors who ever lived. After the funeral, someone asks Dean about his final visit with Duke. "Did you know it would be the last time you'd see him?" Dean is quiet for a moment. "Yeah, I knew." "Did you say goodbye?" "No." "Why not?" Dean looks away, his eyes distant. "Because Duke didn't need goodbye. He needed to be treated like he was still Duke, like he was still here. Saying goodbye would have been admitting he was leaving, and he wasn't ready for that." "Do you regret not saying it?" Dean thinks about that. "No. Duke knew how I felt. We didn't need to say the words. What he needed from me was to be his friend, not his mourner. So that's what I was." Years later, Duke's daughter Isaiah writes about Dean's visit in her memoir. She says, Dean Martin's final visit to my father was one of the most loving things I've ever witnessed. Everyone else who came to see Dad in those final months came to say goodbye. They came to tell him how much he'd meant to them. They came to cry and hug him and make peace, and Dad appreciated all of it, but it was exhausting. It reinforced that he was dying, that he was leaving, that people were already mourning him while he was still alive. Dean didn't do that. Dean came and gave Dad 2 hours where he wasn't a dying man. He was just Duke, hanging out with his friend Dean. They joked, they laughed, they talked about stupid things that didn't matter, and in doing that, Dean gave my father something more valuable than any goodbye. He gave him his dignity. He gave him normalcy. He gave him 2 hours of feeling alive instead of feeling like he was already dead. After Dean left, my father said to me, "That's the first time in months someone's treated me like a man instead of a patient." He had tears in his eyes, but he was smiling. The story of Dean Martin's final visit to John Wayne is about more than just two Hollywood legends. It's about what it means to truly love someone who's dying. Most people, when they visit someone who's terminally ill, come for themselves. They come to say goodbye so they'll have closure. They come to express their feelings so they won't have regrets. They come to make peace so they can move on. Dean didn't come for himself. He came for Duke. He came to give Duke what Duke needed, not what Dean needed. And what Duke needed wasn't tears or goodbyes or sympathy. Duke needed to feel like Duke one last time. That's real friendship. That's real love. Not making it about your feelings, but about what the other person needs. Not saying what you want to say, but doing what needs to be done. Dean Martin could have walked into Duke's house and cried. He could have told Duke how much their friendship meant to him. He could have said a proper goodbye, and Duke would have understood. Duke would have appreciated it. But Dean knew that Duke had already heard all of that from everyone else. What Duke hadn't heard, what Duke desperately needed, was someone treating him like he wasn't dying. So Dean gave him that gift, and it was the greatest act of friendship and compassion that anyone showed John Wayne in his final days. When Dean Martin died in 1995, his daughter Deanna talked about her father's philosophy on death and friendship. She said, "My father believed that when someone is dying, the kindest thing you can do is not make them feel like they're dying. Don't make their illness the center of every conversation. Don't treat them like they're fragile. Don't speak to them in sad, careful voices. Treat them like they're still the person they've always been, because that's who they want to be, even if their body is failing them." That's what Dad did for Duke. He didn't pretend Duke wasn't sick. He acknowledged it with humor, joking about how thin Duke was, how bad he looked, but he didn't dwell on it. He didn't make it the focus. He moved past it and just hung out with his friend. And that's the greatest gift you can give someone who's dying, the gift of still being seen as alive. The lesson isn't about death. It's about dignity. It's about seeing past the disease to the person underneath. It's about giving people what they need, not what you think they should need. John Wayne was dying. Everyone knew it. But for 2 hours on that afternoon in 1979, Dean Martin made sure that Duke wasn't a dying man. He was just Duke. Still tough, still ornery, still laughing. And when Duke died 2 months later, one of his final good memories was sitting in his living room with Dean Martin, trading insults and dirty jokes like they'd done on the set of Rio Bravo 20 years earlier. That's friendship. That's love. That's Dean Martin, not the cool crooner, not the king of cool, just Dean. A man who understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is treating them exactly as you always have, even when everything has changed. John Wayne died knowing that at least one person still saw him as Duke, and that person was Dean Martin.